Let's get back to New South Wales now. And really across the country, the number 1, 2 and 3 issue is housing. We've seen plans put forward by the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns to the chagrin of some mayors in the west and in the north. Joining me live now is the Premier Chris Minns. Thanks so much for your time. First of all, how many homes are actually going to get built this year in New South Wales?
Well, I can't give you a precise number, Laura. The main reason for that is that it's Australia's largest private market, and as a result of that, it's got a whole bunch of inputs that determine how many homes will be built, the availability of labour, how much materials will be available, land supply. But what I can say is the New South Wales government is going to do everything it can to remove barriers so we can lift the amount of houses that will be built so that young people can have a future in a city like Sydney.
There's a federal government target, though. You have a target of your own in New South Wales, which is going to be hard to meet. How can you not have a yearly target at least?
Well, I mean, obviously we want to get to the average of 70,000 a year so that we can meet the federal government's target, which everybody signed up to, all states and territories, even all local councils, to that national target so that we can deliver more housing. I mean, last year, New South Wales produced 48,000 dwellings, Victoria produced 58,000 on a per capita basis. We're last on the east coast of Australia, notwithstanding the fact that we've got the most pressing and most difficult housing challenges. So we need to do more, and I'd love to give a precise number, but I think a reasonable person would say, well, you've got the demands of the market, you've got financing, you've got labour constraints, you've got capacity constraints in the construction sector. There's a big problem when it comes to the government, when it comes to dwelling, and I'm doing everything I can to remove red tape, bureaucracy, zoning challenges so that we're not the problem. And I'm confident we'll meet those targets in the years ahead. Well,
I did note that you just mentioned there that councils also signed up to this target. You've had a few problematic mayors on your hands that weren't happy with the decision you made about density over Christmas. It's important that all the mayors are on board, isn't it? Because otherwise, you know, we just get political fights and nothing gets built. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, it's mixed, if I'm going to be honest. Some mayors and councils we've been engaging with and have made real progress in negotiating. I mean, we're completely agnostic about how the houses are built, provided we can get more, particularly along public transport routes. So
you don't
we get a mayor coming along,
though,
and this is happening.
Premier, I mean, you're talking a lot about density and not about new transport routes to, you know, have a more spread out Sydney.
Well, no, I am, genuinely. And I think if you could see, hopefully in the coming weeks, the genuine product of those negotiations. What we have said in a whole range of places around metropolitan Sydney in particular is we want this level of density around this local train station. If the local council comes to us and says, well, we think there's a better way of delivering it, we're completely agnostic about it. We're happy for that to happen. What we can't have, and this has been the situation in New South Wales for over a decade, is everybody saying we're not prepared to take anything and we're not even prepared to negotiate around the table. Those days are over, and the reason for that, quite self-evidently, is that housing, the price of housing, the price of rent is too expensive for young people, and we lost twice as many people between the ages of 30 and 40 than we gained in the last 5 years.
Yeah, a city without grandchildren, that was the warning from the Productivity Commission. But, I mean, there was a couple of months ago where you threatened to take the power out of local councils if they were dragging their feet on approving DAs. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, that's exactly what our transport-oriented developments will do. In the first instance, unless we can get genuine progress when it comes to housing in particular zones, particularly around public transport, then the government will go ahead, take those planning powers over and ensure that we get density around public transport infrastructure. If we get to the table and the mayors or the local councils say, look, we'll give you that number, we'll give you the density that you're after in our own way, then we'll repeal the SEPs. But I have to say, during the period between when the national agreement was signed and a couple of weeks ago, the number of councils that came to the state government and said, here's our plan for density in our community was one. One out of 130.
Who was that?
Finally, we're getting some progress, Newcastle Council. So we're getting some genuine progress all of a sudden because the Minister for Planning, Paul Scully's come to the table and said, well, look, unless you move, we're going to take over. And I think that's the right call given the crisis we're facing.
One thing you have absolute control over, isn't it, is taxes. So I spoke to one of the building companies and lobby groups yesterday that said essentially the cost of building a new home, 40% of that is taxes, most of them state. Would you cut something there? Make it cheaper for people?
Well, our biggest tax cut since we came into power was a tax cut for first home buyers in the state, and 5 out of 6 first home buyers pay no stamp duty or a reduced amount in New South Wales. I think something like 18,000 since we came to power. So a huge number of people, particularly if they purchase a property for under $800,000, don't pay any stamp duty, giving them at least access to the market and allowing them to compete with a lot of older Australians that might be buying an investment property. So, look, that's a positive step, something the previous government didn't do. It costs a lot of money in terms of the budget, but the right decision given how much pressure young people are under.
Yeah, I'm talking about taxes in construction phase as well, and the red tape. I mean, it wouldn't have passed you by that some Western Sydney mayors are complaining about, extra taxes on homes up to $50,000 to adhere to environmental standards. Is that something you're willing to look at?
Well, they say that. I heard them on your program in the last week, and generally speaking, the mayors come on and say, look, we'd love to have as many homes as you can put in, but the one thing we don't have is infrastructure. Now, look, we've taken them at face value, and as a result of that, we do have a developer levy on new homes in New South Wales. It'll deliver $1 billion over the forward estimates, and then it's $700 million every year after that. Now, that money will go straight to local councils for enabling infrastructure, so that we can break the cycle of everybody pointing at each other and saying, look, we'd love to have more housing, but we've got no money for infrastructure. We've provided almost that annuity law to get into local councils so we can put the wastewater treatment, the potable water, the roads, the parks, the infrastructure that growing communities need. And I don't think we could have had one without the other. There's no way we would meet our housing goals unless I was able to, hand on heart, with a proper plan, say to the people of Sydney, well, here's how we're going to build infrastructure and here's where the housing will go.
And Premier, you've been pretty pro-immigration to a point, I would say. You're not wanting this to be unchecked in any way. But I know at a property council event a couple of weeks ago, the former Premier, Dominic Perrottet, talked about immigration, described it as a Ponzi scheme, and essentially that New South Wales is paying for the lion's share because most new migrants, they either move to Sydney or Melbourne, most of them are in Sydney. He thinks that New South Wales should be better compensated for doing the heavy lifting. Yes, we get the benefits, but we're also doing the heavy lifting when it comes to pressure on housing and infrastructure and transport.
Well, I think he's right in the sense that we need more help from the Commonwealth Government. They've got deeper pockets, particularly when it comes to infrastructure. And look, I'm so reluctant to come on the program and say Canberra's got to cough up more because I feel like every one of my predecessors said exactly the same thing. But a genuine partnership between the states and the Commonwealth where we can say, look, we're coming to the table, this is where we want to build housing, this is how we want Sydney to grow and the regions in New South Wales to grow. But we genuinely need partnerships on public transport projects in particular, because if we can do that, I think that we can have ambitions to be a city that has the ease of transport of a Tokyo or a London or a Paris. But we're a long way from that at the moment, and that kind of investment is going to be needed in the years ahead.
You'd have a lot more money, or the federal government would have a lot more money to funnel perhaps into New South Wales if they scrap that rubbish GST deal that it did with WA.
Yes, I think that's unlikely to happen, but sure. Look, one of the things that we did do in the last National Cabinet was strike a deal with the Commonwealth to extend the no worse off guarantee for New South Wales until 2030. So that takes some of the pressure off our shoulders. But, I mean, the bottom line here is New South Wales taxpayers send a lot of money to Canberra in their taxes, particularly income and company taxes. And we need our fair share because we want this to be the powerhouse of the Australian economy. There's tons of businesses that are beginning in New South Wales, but as it stands today, we are losing young people to other states. We're losing twice as many as we gain between 30 and 40. And they're the people in your community that join neighbourhoods, start businesses, pay taxes, start families. They're, I don't like thinking of them as economic models, but they stimulate an enormous amount of activity in your community, and frankly, Sydney can't afford to see them go.